Okay, let's take this to the audience and get some views. How influential do you think the media has become? Ali, what do you think on the topic?
Well, I just wanted to say that while multiple media outlets continue to be controlled by a few large conglomerates, then there will always be the suspicion that someone with their own agenda, powerful people with their own agenda, can influence the media. And I think the media maybe needs to, work itself to clear itself of that suspicion. And also, if there is a general understanding amongst the media that, the media does focus on the extreme sides of media to keep that entertainment value. They need to be mindful of the fact that, large sections of society are relying on the media for facts, and that is where they get their facts from. Whereas before you'd go and read a history book, now you rely on what the news says. I think with great power comes great responsibility, and I think the media could do more to show that it's using that responsibility wisely.
Well, you've touched there on the media being a sort of entertainment medium. What's the panel's view on that? Gordon, what do you think? Is the media there to entertain, or is it there to actually report factually?
I would say first and foremost it's there to report factually, but I'm afraid the way the business goes, it's there to deliver ratings. And if I've got a choice of 3 interviewees, I am going to go for the most appealing interviewee. And often in television, you would choose not necessarily the world's expert on a particular issue, you will choose somebody who knows quite a bit about it, but is very telegenic. I'm afraid it's all about delivering audiences. And I'm aware during an interview that I've got to keep a spark going, I've got to have a rapport with that person, I've probably got to wind them up a bit. There has got to be entertainment value. And if I get, well, I never set out to have an argument with an interviewee, but arguments work terribly well on television because they're terribly dramatic, but nothing comes out of them. It's a complete and utter waste of time, but it's entertaining.
So, Robin, how do you think the media has evolved over the last, say, 10 or 20 years?
Well, I think they do need to entertain the audience. And the reason I say that is because there is now so much competition from other areas. And the public are now split between the internet, between video games. They are looking for alternative sources of entertainment and information.
Right. Okay, Wakad, do you think it's fair to say then that the media is just selling us hyped up stories based on huge generalizations for their own financial benefit?
I think firstly, I mean, there is a balance to strike when it comes to the perception of the media as having a responsibility to inform and educate, and at the same time to entertain as well. These days, as we know, presentation and image is everything. If, for instance, the Times decided to suddenly publish its broadsheet papers as it did 100 years ago, it wouldn't sell. Because it's the image, it's the way in which things are presented. If it had an attractive woman on the front page of its edition for that day, then it is more likely to sell than a Muslim praying, for instance. It's just the way in which it will play on what it knows society wants as well. Okay. It almost creates that desire amongst people to expect something. Whereas it's actually, as has been mentioned earlier, there are forces at work which almost try and create that impression that this is what you want, this is why we're supplying it to you. So there is a balance that has to be...
Okay, so if that is the case, whose fault is that? Is that the media's fault, would you say, or do you think that's society's fault for demanding?
I think that fundamentally it is the media which is trying to, as Gordon quite rightly said, trying to get those ratings. And for that purpose, they have to dramatize the news. They have to hype up the news and present them as an attractive news, whether may that be in terms of violence, extremism, or whatever, which is for the viewer, it is something attractive.
Let's look at the wider influence of media in general. Robin, what do you think? In terms of when stories are being reported, aren't there already the editorial guidelines to stop this sort of bias coming through?
There are editorial guidelines. However, I was saying earlier to the panel that every journalist approaches an issue from a subjective viewpoint. I mean, we all have our own views, we all make assumptions. I do it, you do it, everyone does it. Journalists are no different to us. They make assumptions about the story beforehand. Now, a good journalist will say, I'm going to challenge my own assumptions as well. So I'm going to get opposing points of view. I'm going to get a plurality of points of view to see, actually, whether my theory is borne out in terms of what other people think. Now, some journalists are better at it than others, as we all know, and depending on time, so if you are under pressure of time, if you have got half an hour or 3 hours to get your story together, you maybe don't approach as many people as you should, don't do as much research as you should, and get the story quite right. And there is a problem there in terms of the pressure that journalists are under to get a story out there, to make it entertaining, to make it watchable and get the ratings in, as well as getting the facts right and getting those different voices in the story.
So do you think that's an inevitable consequence of 24-hour media when people are working towards these tight deadlines?
Yes, it's 24-hour media, but it's also the way in which the public now look at news. I mean, they want news in small bites. They don't want to watch an entire hour-long programme. They want 5 minutes, 30 seconds, a minute. They're looking at their smartphones to check out what's happening on the internet. So it's little bits of news, and I think that puts a pressure on all journalists, both written journalists and broadcast journalists, to summarise the news in very, very small chunks of in 15-word sentences. And that doesn't allow for detail or different points of view. People want that little summary, and that's what they take away with them.
Okay, so based on your experience, how can people use that to put their view across through in the media?
Well, I think my job has been to advise government ministers, to advise the heads of organisations, to say, how do we get our message across in the media? And part of what you do is to try and to encapsulate your key message in those 15 words, and then give that to the journalists and say, there you go, this is what we're saying. And because it's written in such a short form of words, they will, generally speaking, take that and use it. So the soundbite in news journalism is very, very important. I can't stress how important it is. And a good soundbite, will get the message across much quicker than a much longer article or a form of
Okay,
words.
let me, Ricardo, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to share, developing further the point that Robin's just made about sound bites and crisp, short, succinct messages that need to go out very quickly. I remember when I first started out in journalism, I was working with an independent news group, and one of my first assignments was to go along with another more experienced reporter to a court case which involved a Bangladeshi man. This was in Birmingham in 2002. Who had been suspected of plotting a bomb attack on Britain. And when we were doing the write-up together after hearing the proceedings for that particular day, I started the first sentence, and the opening line that I suggested was that a Bangladeshi man has been suspected of whatever the allegation was, or whatever he was charged with. And my colleague had said, well, change Bangladeshi to Muslim. I said, why? And he said, well, it will sell. And that was the honest answer that he gave. I said, why would you want to emphasize the fact that he is of a particular religion? Why is it not enough to call him a Bangladeshi? And he said, he actually shrugged his shoulders at that. He said, this is the world we live in. He said, otherwise, I'm afraid the story will not be of any interest to anyone. So unfortunately, that is the reality that we face.
Okay, so let's move to the audience. So if this is the state of the media at the moment, how do we fish through these stories to find out the actual real truth in these? Yeah.
So, I mean, I agree with the whole responsibility aspect, but I think, on the media side, but I think there's definitely a responsibility on the audience and the people watching this news, because, I mean, I, for one, now I'm at the point where whenever I see or read news, I treat it with cynicism, and I think about what they've said and why they might have said it another way. And the reason really that came to me was, whilst working, when I travel to different countries, you can see the difference, how the same story, maybe about Israel or Iraq, is reported differently here to another country. So if you can see that so clearly, then it becomes a responsibility for you to think, well, actually, okay, I'm being fed this information, but it's my responsibility as a viewer to be able to interpret that and use my own education to figure out really what the story behind it is. So, I think it's easy to blame everything on the media, but a responsibility should be taken. And the media should also be aware that there are definitely a lot of people who are influenced by the news, a large population. But there's also a good population who treat it just as a source of information and are cynical about it and really are kind of tired of listening to the news because they don't really believe what they're hearing. So, there's always two sides to the story in that perspective.